How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another exciting video. In the last video, we did a lot of the initial setup for our React front end and also got the Redux, Redux to kind of be implemented in our application. And now kind of the goal of this section is to tackle being able to register for an account through our front end. So that's what we're going to try to work on here. And then I'm just going to navigate into my front end, and then that way I can just do an npm run start, check out our app so far. All right, and there we are. So this is what we have right now. So we just set up the home page, the login page, register page, and now we're going to kind of tackle doing the form on this register and also doing the logic for actually sending a register request to our backend and then having an account registered. So let's go ahead and do that. So another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open another terminal. I'm going to navigate into my backend. I'm going to make sure that my database is running. I'm going to activate my virtual environment. And I'm going to run my server. All right, so now I have my backend running. Now let's go ahead and start tackling this front end and getting everything to work. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is just implement the logic to actually get a register request to work. So I'm going to first start off with my actions and reducers, and then I'm going to go into my register page and then just kind of make the form and get that action in there and get that all working. So I'm going to go into my types here. I'm going to zoom in a bit just so I don't have to do as much editing, and hopefully you guys can see what's going on. And let's go ahead and create some dispatch types. So export const, and then I'm going to call this register success. I'm just going to copy paste that in here. And then I'm going to have one more dispatch state, except this one's going to be register fail. So there we go. Those are my dispatch states. Let me go ahead and now work on my action. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import Axios from Axios because I'm going to be making API requests. And then I'm going to import those dispatch states. So, or sorry, not sign up, but I called it register, success, and register fail. And then that's coming from my types. There we go. And now let's go ahead and create the action that's going to do this registration. So export const, I'm going to call it register. And then in here, I'm going to have, for this function, a username, a password, and repassword that's passed in as parameters. This is going to be async dispatch. And then within here, we're going to do the logic. So going to have some configuration, which is going to be my headers. This is going to be an object, this headers. And then within here, I'm going to accept. There we go. Accept application JSON. And then I'm also going to have content type application JSON. So this accept, I'm doing this because in my backend, if we go ahead and check out the views we made, if I go into, where's my sign up view? So here's my sign up view. And then I'm basically passing back JSON responses. Whoop, didn't mean to do that. So I'm passing back JSON responses. If something goes wrong, we're going to get an error and it's going to have some kind of message. And if things work out, we're going to have success with some kind of success message. So that's why I'm doing this accept application JSON. All right, so after that, I'm going to do const body is json.stringify. And I'm going to do json.stringify on my username, password, and repassword, since I want this to be passed as JSON data in my API request. So I do that with json.stringify. And then here I can do my try catch. And this is where I'm actually going to do that request. So within here, I'm going to do const response is equal to await axios.post. And then one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an environment variable. So the way I can do that is in my front end folder. I'm going to do .env. And then within here, I can do React app API URL. And then this is going to be HTTP localhost 8000, just like this. And you have to make sure that your environment variables start with React _ app _. Otherwise, you won't be able to access them. So now I can use these backticks, and then I can do process.env.react app API URL, then accounts, register, because that is our API endpoint. And we can verify that by checking our root URLs. So for our accounts app, we have accounts/, and then for register, it'll be accounts/register. That'll hit our sign up view. So that's how we can verify these endpoints. And now what I'm going to do is if response.data.error, if some kind of error occurs. So basically, if this exists, because whenever we have an error, we send back an error JSON object with some kind of message. So if this exists, something went wrong, so we're going to dispatch an error. So type is going to be register fail. And then also, if anything goes wrong here, it's also going to be a register fail. And then if everything goes okay, then we're going to dispatch our success. So this is what it's going to look like. And then in this API endpoint, you got to also pass in that body and that config. So there we go. This is how we do this action. Now let's go ahead and tackle the reducer. I'm going to close these files because I don't need them anymore. So in the reducers, I'm going to open up auth, and let's create this. So let me import those dispatch states. So register success and register fail from actions types. And then I'm going to have some initial state. So I'm going to have is authenticated. By default, this will be null. I'm going to have username. It's going to be empty, an empty string by default. And I'm going to have a couple more fields. So first name, last name, phone, and city. So these are going to be my different application level states. And then I can do export default function state equals initial state and action. So this is how we create this reducer. And then I'm going to destructure my action. So I'm going to take out the type and the payload from action. And then I'm going to have a switch case here. It's going to look like this. I'm going to have my different cases. So I'm going to have register success. This will just return, let's say, state and is authenticated false. Now, this is how I'm going to do it. So whenever you register for an account, then it's just going to make sure that you're not authenticated, and then these other fields will still be empty until you actually log in. And then if you are logged in, then you should not be able to register for an account. So that's kind of the way we're going to handle it in the front end. So in the nav bar, the thing we're going to do is if you're authenticated, we're not going to show the login and the register or sign up links. So you're not going to be able to click and navigate to the register page. And then technically you could still search in the URL for localhost 8000 / register. And then in that case, we're going to make sure that in our register page, if the user is authenticated, we're just going to, instead of showing them the register page, we're just going to kind of return a redirect component, which will redirect them to something like the home page. So that's how we're going to handle that. You have another case here, register fail. Just going to return, let's say, the state. Then I'm going to have a default case. And this is also going to return state. So that's how I'm going to handle the reducer. So now the final kind of thing to work on here is my register page. So let's go ahead and work on this. I'm going to have some state in this page because I'm going to have my form with the username, password, and also the confirm password field. So I'm going to have a state to manage that. Also, when I have a React hook, I have to make sure that my component starts with a capital letter or I'm going to get an error. And let's remove all of this because I'm not going to just be returning JSX, but I'm going to have some logic here. I'm going to have a return, and for now I'm just going to return a div. And then later, going to fill this out with our form. All right, so I'm going to need form data, set form data. This is use state. It's going to be an object, and here we're going to have our different fields. So we're going to have username, which by default is going to be an empty string. Going to have password, also empty, and then repassword. So these are our fields. Now let's go ahead and destructure them. So const username, password, and repassword equals form data. And then with my inputs, I want to make sure that when, let's say, the username input, I'm typing stuff, then it's going to update this username. Same thing if I'm typing in the password input, I want it to update this. So my input fields are going to have an onChange prop, which is basically going to trigger an onChange function I'm going to create now. So const onChange, it's going to have an event as a parameter, and then I'm going to do set form data. Going to have my spread operator, form data. So that way, so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be changing one of these fields. So I want to make sure that what I'm setting is everything else untouched except for that one field I'm updating. So if I'm typing in the username in the username input, it's going to adjust this, but it's not going to touch this. So that's why we have the spread operator. And then the way I can target it is by doing e.target.name. And I'm going to set that to e.target.value. So there you go. So e.target.name is going to either be username, password, or repassword, depending on what input field the user clicks on. And then as they type, e.target.value is going to be those keys that they're typing, and it's going to be adjusting these pieces of state to whatever the user is inputting in those input fields. And then when the user submits the form, I'm going to have an on submit. So E, so that's the event as the parameter we're going to have. I'm going to do e.prevent default. That way this prevents the default behavior of refreshing our page. Then I'm going to have a check here, checking if password is equal to repassword. If it is, then we're going to hit our register action. So this way we're going to protect this on the front end. That way we're not making any unnecessary API requests if the passwords don't match. And then we're also protecting it on the back end if the API request is made regardless of if these passwords are different. So let's say in something like Postman, you could do that. So now we're going to do that register action. So first thing I have to do is actually bring that in. So I'm going to import register. This is coming from actions auth. And then I also need my connect helper. So this way I can use that action in here. So that's from React Redux. So these are two things that I need. And then I can wrap this. And then for the props or the application level state, I'm going to have it null for now. Later on, I'm going to change this from null and actually utilize the is authenticated piece of state we made. So that is this one right here. So basically this is authenticated. It's going to be true when we log in. And then also it's going to be updated to true when we refresh our app. Then we're going to make a request to check whether the user's authenticated. And if they are, it's also going to be adjusted to true. So that was actually a URL I didn't test when I was doing the backend. So that was this account/authenticated. And this is our check authenticated view. And this check authenticated view is going to return basically is authenticated success or is authenticated error, depending on whether is authenticated is true. So basically this is authenticated. We're doing this user.isAuthenticated. So if they are authenticated, it'll return this response. Otherwise, it'll return this response. So this is a way we can handle on page refreshes to check whether the user is authenticated. So those are two cases where we're going to adjust this piece of state. Except for now, we don't have the login and we also, so basically because we don't have a way to log in yet on our front end, I'm just going to leave this as null for now, and later we're going to add that piece of state into this page here. All right, so one thing I'm going to need is my register function, and then I also have to bring in that register function here. So now I can have access to it. So I can go ahead and register. And then I can pass in the username, and then the password, and repassword. So now this will make my register request. And another thing I want to do is when the user goes ahead and registers, I want them to be redirected to the login page. So I'm going to create some extra states here. This will be I don't know, I can do form submitted or something like account created, doesn't matter. This will be use state. And then by default, it's going to be false. And then when the user goes ahead and hits this on submit and the passwords match, then it's going to do set account created to true. And then before we do this return, which is going to return our sign up form, we're going to check whether that account created piece of state is true. And if it is, we're just going to return a redirect component, which is just going to go to our home page, let's say. And then another thing we have to make sure is that we actually import this. So this is coming from, so redirect is coming from React Router DOM. There we go. So now we can redirect if the user submitted the form so that we don't stay on the sign up page. Now with that, let's go ahead and work on this. I'll put everything in a container and put a little bit of margin at the top. And then in here, I'm going to have my form. So at the top, just going to have my header. It's just going to say register for an account, something like that. And then I'll do something like create an account with our session auth application. I don't know, something like that. Doesn't really matter. Then I'm going to have my form, and this is where I'm going to have those different inputs. So one thing with this form is I'm going to have to set the onSubmit attribute or prop to basically call our onSubmit function that we created. So we do that with arrow function. So this will pass the event to onSubmit, and we're going to take that here as a parameter because that's what we have here. It's our parameter. And now we're going to have our different inputs. So with Bootstrap, what we do is we have form groups. So form-group. And then in here, you can have your label and your input. So I'll have label, class name, form-label, and I'll have username, and then here I'll have my input. And I'll have this on multiple lines because we're going to have quite a few different things. We're going to have to pass in this input. First, we're going to have to style it so it looks decent. So form control is the Bootstrap class for that. It's going to be type of text. We're going to have a placeholder, which is just going to be username, and we're going to have a star so that the user knows it's a required field. We're going to have name be username. Then I'm going to have value, which is our username piece of state. Also going to have the onChange attribute or prop here, which it's going to be similar to our onSubmit, where we have the event, which we pass onto our onChange as a parameter, because here on the onChange, we have this E as our parameter, and then this is going to be the event that is passed. And then another thing I'm going to put is this required to make sure that the user actually puts this in. Then I'm going to copy this whole form group, paste it right below here, and this next one's going to be for the password. So type instead of text is going to be password. We're going to have password here. Name will be password. onChange will be the same. This will be password. We're going to have it be required. And then one more thing I'm going to do is pass min length. And that's going to be equal to 6. This way, this ensures that the user has to pass in 6 characters into this input field. So this is kind of an extra protection on the front end so that we're not making unnecessary API requests. And then, of course, in our back end, we also handle if the user has less than 6 characters. Because, of course, if you're using something like Postman, then you can also technically bypass this. But this is just on our front end so that we're not making these unnecessary API requests. Then we're going to have one more input field, and that'll be for our confirm password, which is going to be very similar, except here we're going to have repassword. Here we're going to have repassword. Placeholder, I'll do something like confirm password. Type is still password, and yeah, all of this is the same. So now we should have a form, and the last thing I need is a button. So my button, I'll put a class name of button primary, and that should be good. Type I'll have as submit. And then I'll just have the button have the text register Or you can do like register for an account, whatever you want. Doesn't really matter. So I'll go ahead and save this and see what we've got. All right, looking okay, except some of the spacing is a little odd. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that. Add some extra Bootstrap classes. Margin top, I don't know, either 3 or 5. Let's test out 3. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then these last 2 labels. So this one here, I want to put some margin top, and same with this one here. And this one right here is probably fine. So let's do margin top 3 on this one, and margin top 3 on this one. Let's see how that looks. And there we go. Spacing's a little better. This one here could still have a little more spacing, so why not? Let's do margin top 5, see how that looks. And it's quite a bit of spacing. I don't know, maybe the 3 is a little better. So I'll leave it at 3. And then one more thing I'm going to add is just some text below this form that kind of asks if the user already has an account, and then it'll have a link to the login page. So this will be a paragraph, class name, margin top 3, just to have some spacing. Already have an account? If so, we're going to have a link, which I have to make sure I import. This also comes from React Router DOM. So there we go. Scroll back down. This link is going to go to /login. And then here I'm just going to do like sign in. And that should be good. So yeah, already have an account. Go ahead and sign in, which will navigate us to the login page. So perfect. That's what we want to see. All right, so now we should be good. So we should be able to now make this API request. All right, so one thing I'm going to do is make sure to build this and then put it into the backend. So the build folder is going to go into my backend folder. So one thing to make this a little easier is I can open up the package.json, and then I can adjust this build. So first thing, when we run the command npm run build, I want it to delete any existing build folder in here. So remove rf backend/build. After that, we're gonna run the React build script, and then we're gonna copy recursively our build folder into backend build. So that way it does this all automated. So I don't have to actually go ahead, copy my build folder, and then paste it in my backend folder. So now we can see this in action right now. So you do npm run build. So first I tried to remove, there was nothing here, so it didn't remove anything. And there we go. So we ended up building this, and then we copied this into backend. All right, so now I'm just gonna rerun this server just in case. And now let me navigate to localhost 8000. I'll have my console open. Actually, do that after. So let's go ahead and try to register. And before I register, I have Postman open here. And I'm just going to make a request to accounts get users. So let's just see what users we have currently. So we have John Doe, we have Brian, we have John, and we have Bob. So now let's make an account like, let's say, Thomas. Let's go ahead, register, and let's see what happened. Register failed. All right, let's go in our console. And here we see, failed to load resource. The server responded with a status of 403 forbidden. And then also here in our backend, we can see that right here, our post request, we had forbidden CSRF cookie not set. So now this is the next part that we're going to tackle and see in our front end how we can actually go ahead and CSRF protect this, pass a CSRF token along with our request, and actually get this registration to work. So that's kind of the next step now. So if you go ahead and Google Django CSRF, you can go ahead and click on this first link it should be. So cross-site request forgery protection, Django documentation. And this here for Ajax requests is going to give you this function which helps with retrieving the cookie. So I'm going to go ahead, copy this, and I'm going to use that in a little bit. So what I'm going to do now is in my components, I'm going to create another component. I'm going to call it CSRF token.js. All right, let me close this for now. Have a little more space and maybe zoom in a little more. I'm going to import React from React. Whoop. There we go. And then I'm also going to import Axios from Axios. I'm also going to need useState and useEffect in this. So useState, useEffect. And then I'm going to have my component, CSRF token. I'm going to have curly braces, export default CSRF token. And then I'm going to return something. Or, sorry, this should be round brackets, because I'm going to be returning some JSX. For now, I'll just do an empty div as a placeholder. All right, so this is what I have right now. And now I'm going to go ahead and paste that function I copied from that documentation. So that was this right here. All right, so now I'm going to adjust this a little bit. So I'm going to use ES6 syntax. So I'm going to do const get cookie equals name and just turn this into an arrow function. I'm going to have let cookie value equals none. I can get rid of this comment. Also, instead of having this be constant, I can use let and let. And I'm also going to delete this line here. All right, so now I have something that looks like this. So this is a function that will help me retrieve my CSRF token into my application. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a piece of state, which is going to be CSRF token set CSRF token. It's going to be set equal to useState. And I'm just going to have it be an empty string initially. So now I'm going to have a useEffect hook. And I'm going to treat this kind of like a component did mount. And then within here, I'm going to have const fetch data async. So this is an asynchronous function I'm making within here, and then after I'm going to call it. All right, so what am I going to pass in here? So if we go back into our backend, check out our URLs. We had this CSRF cookie URL, which calls this get CSRF token view, if you remember when we were setting up the backend. And then that view. So I was right here. We did this method decorator ensure CSRF cookie, and this made sure that we retrieve a CSRF cookie in our application. So whenever we hit this route, we'll retrieve a CSRF cookie in our application. But then we also have to have a way to access it. So the first step is to go ahead and kind of make a request to that route. So I'm going to use a try catch. So I'm going to try to do axios.get. I'm going to use my backticks. And then here I'm going to do process.env.react app API URL. And this is going to be accounts/CSRF token. All Or I think it was CSRF cookie, actually. Let me double check real quick, just to make sure I have that right. Yeah, CSRF underscore cookie. So that's the API endpoint we're hitting. And then this will bring a CSRF cookie in our application. So after we fetch this data, I also want to do set CSRF token. So that is calling this right here, set CSRF token. And now I want to retrieve the CSRF token and then pretty much have this CSRF token piece of state be equal to our actual CSRF token. So I can do that by calling our get cookie function that we created right here. So I'm going to call that. And then I'm going to pass CSRF token in a string. So that's going to retrieve my CSRF token. And then I'm going to set my piece of state equal to that token. And the last thing I want to do is, instead of returning a div, what I actually want to do is I want to return an input. Now this is going to have a type of hidden. So this is going to be a hidden input that we send along with our form requests. It's going to have name be CSRF middleware, or CSRF middleware token. That's going to be the name. And then the value is going to be CSRF token. So that's what we're returning. So now we can use this component we just created in order to CSRF protect our forms. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to open up our register form again. And now let's go ahead and import that. So import CSRF token from components CSRF token. And now I can easily protect my forms by just doing CSRF token. Because now this is just going to return that hidden input field with the CSRF token. All right, so now let's go back into our front end. Let's build this, and let's see if now this is enough to get this request to work. All right, so everything built now. Let's go into here. So if I go ahead and check out application and go into cookies, localhost 8000, right now I don't have any cookie. But as soon as I go into the register page, then I'm going to retrieve that cookie. So now let's see if that worked. So I go back into application, and there we go. We have CSRF token. So now we have this cookie in our application. And then as for our users, because our request failed before, we don't have that user Thomas. So let's go ahead and try to create him. All right, and let's see if now this works. And again, we get a register fail. So if we check out our console, we're going to see we have 403 forbidden on accounts/register, and also our backend, same thing. Forbidden, CSRF token missing, or incorrect. All right, so the reason for this is because if you remember when we were doing the backend, whenever you send a post request, so if I go into register in, what's this called? Postman. So if I go here, in our headers, if you remember, we have this header that we have to also pass with our CSRF token. So now that's the last step we have to do to actually get this API request to work without getting our 403 forbidden. So now we're going to see how we do that. So we have to do that with GET requests. You don't have to pass that header, but with the other requests, you do have to pass this header type. So in order to do that, we have to go back into our actions auth. And I'm just going to close this for now. And now we have to adjust this so that we can actually go ahead and pass that content type. So it's going to look like X CSRF token. But now this next part is, how do we actually go ahead and retrieve that cookie? So that's kind of the challenge. So if we go into our package.json, If you remember when we were first creating this, we had this JS cookie library that we imported. So that's what we're going to kind of take use of now so that we can actually access that cookie. So I'm going to do import cookies from JS cookie. And now I can use this to basically get my CSRF token. So I do cookies.get. And now here I get that CSRF token. Now, how do I know what I pass here? If again I go into application, we have this CSRF token. That's what it's going to be called, CSRF token. So that's the cookie. So in a string, I pass CSRF token. And now that will actually retrieve that cookie. And then we're going to pass it along in this header so that we can actually register for an account. So with that, now that should be enough. Now, if that's not enough, then I didn't plan for that like I did with these last few requests. So hopefully nothing goes wrong now, but I think it should be good. I think everything has been okay so far. All right, so that went ahead and built. So I'm just gonna rerun the server just in case. Let's refresh this app. All right, so once again, let's get the users. Just so we can see that Thomas wasn't created yet. So now let's go ahead and try to create this user Thomas. So if I go into register, so now I'm gonna have that CSRF token. So I'm gonna retrieve this, pass it as a hidden input along with this request, and I'm also gonna pass that XCSRF token header along with the register request. And with that, we should be able to be successful in creating this user now. So let's check our dispatch state, and there we go. Register success, and then we adjusted this is authenticated to be false because when they register for an account, we don't want is authenticated to be true, of course. But I also got redirected to the home page, which is a little unexpected. I didn't expect to be redirected there. And yeah, that's because this here, account created, I actually meant to redirect to login. So yeah, that's just a small detail. I'm not going to go ahead and rebuild this just to test that because it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, that's the only difference. I don't want to redirect to the home page. I want to redirect to the login page once I register for an account. So that's kind of the only small adjustment to this. But yeah, now we're actually able to register for an account. And just to double check that everything went okay, I'm going to send an API request. And also, again, this is the reason why I actually created this API endpoint and view. That way it's actually really easy for me to check what users I have and see if things are working. So there we go. Now I have this user with the username Thomas, ID 6. So we successfully managed to register this account, and now we can even log into it once we add that functionality. So that's actually going to be the next step in this application, creating our login and logout functionality. So hopefully you enjoyed this section and learned a whole bunch of new things. Make sure to leave a nice big like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this kind of content. Hit that bell icon to get notifications whenever a new video comes out. And then I will see you in the next video where we go ahead and continue in this application and create the login and logout functionality on the React side.